as a man, I'm fed so many narratives that other men are enemies, other men are rivals.
Welcome to Normalizing Non-Monogamy, the podcast where we interview incredible people from across the entire spectrum of non-monogamy to hear their fascinating stories. We always strive to bring guests on the show who have a healthy and positive approach to non-monogamy.
However, everyone approaches this a little different, and at its core, our show is about hearing and learning from the different experiences and approaches people have. With that in mind, it's important to remember that the views and opinions expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect those of our own.
It's also important to remember that we aren't doctors or therapists and that we produce this show for entertainment purposes only. Please consult a medical professional for anything regarding your health that you might learn about on this show.
One final thing that we need to let you know about is that this podcast will hopefully include some explicit language. So, if that kind of thing offends you, we suggest you just keep listening until it no longer does. However, if you're under the age of 18, you should probably stop listening or gather up your parents and listen as a family. Enjoy! Go, Emma, go!
Welcome to episode 45. Yay!
Who?
We're Finn and Emma. Of course.
We are.
And today we have an amazing interview with Kevin Patterson. He is the founder of the blog Poly Role Models. He's also written 2 books.
In 2018.
Yeah.
Holy shitballs.
Yeah.
2 books in 1 year.
It's pretty crazy. The first one's called Love is Not Colorblind. And the second one is called For Hire Operator.
Yeah, and he's going to talk about a little more about all those, but he's a very awesome author, blog runner, and a speaker.
Blog runner,
yeah. It's like Blade Runner, but better. Yeah. So yeah, awesome interview with.
And he has a lot of good insights for about the poly community. That's what I'm trying to say.
You said it, sister. One quick thing we mentioned last week, and I'm going to do it much shorter this week. If you can, 2 weeks ago. If you can, give us some feedback. We're going to keep trying to find awesome resources for everybody. Whether they support the show financially or not, we want to find things that we think are useful. One of them is the My One condoms, custom fit condoms, and they're super awesome. We heard about them a couple episodes ago from one of our guests, and we dug into it, and we were able to get them to give us 10% off. We'll actually give you 10% off. And you basically go on, you get sized up, and you find the condom that's right for you out of their 60 different sizes, and then those are the ones you wear. And it fits like a glove.
Yeah. 10% off.
Fits like a condom.
Fits like a condom, yeah. 10% off using the code Emma at checkout.
Yep, and we'll put links in the show notes.
Yeah.
What's the other one we want to tell them?
STD check. This one's a great resource for STI testing. It's easy and fast. You can get a $10 discount by using the link on our website as well. Our website is normalizingnonmonogamy.com. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram, and on Cassidy under the screen name NNM Podcast.
Yeah, so go check all those out. And again, shoot us some feedback over whether or not you absolutely hate us talking about and giving you new resources. If you would rather see a different model, tell us what you think. Again, the new website is up, and you can now send us voice recordings or an email. So plenty of ways to tell us what you think in your kindest voice possible.
Yeah, let's go talk to Kevin.
Let's do it. Thank you, Kevin Patterson, for joining us tonight. For anybody who's not familiar with who you are, do you mind filling people in on a quick background and bio of who you are and how we got to be here?
Well, I think what people probably know about me is for going into almost at 4 years now, I've run a blog called Poly Role Models, which is like an interview series and people talk about their real experiences with polyamory. That's sort of spun off into me speaking in a lot of places about the way identity impacts polyamory, masculinity, and race specifically. I wrote a book, Love's Not Colorblind, Race and Representation in Polyamorous and Other Alternative Communities. And most recently, I released a fiction book, which is a superhero novel centering queer and polyamorous and POC identities called For Hire Operator.
Wow, that's really exciting.
Yeah, so you released 2 books this year then, right? Because Poly Role Models launched earlier this year as well. Or, I'm sorry, Love is Not Colorblind.
Love's Not Colorblind.
Yeah.
Love's Not Colorblind came out in the end of March 2018, and I didn't think I was going to be releasing 2 books in the year, but I had written the first draft of For Hire already.
Okay.
And one of my friends, a close metamor of mine, we got together and decided to sort of rewrite the whole thing. Like, we had all the bones, we just sort of added meat to that skeleton and put out a second book, and we're really happy with how that went. So it went from Love's Not Colorblind at the end of March to For Hire Operator in the middle of October.
Wow. That's impressive. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So maybe, do you mind talking a little bit about what your sort of history of being in polyamory or non-monogamy, as it were? I don't know for sure that it's strictly been polyamory your whole journey. Do you mind talking a little bit about how you got into it and what it's looked like?
Yeah. Like for me and for my wife, like we have the same origin story. We started dating in college, and we started dating like January of 2002, and we it was presumed monogamous because every relationship, if you're not having those conversations, just ends up sort of being presumed monogamous. But we went on a road trip to Toronto, which I love. I love Toronto. Every time I go to Toronto, I get like some life-changing experience. And one of them was that we ended up in having a threesome with a friend of hers over the course of this road trip. And when it was supposed to get like weird and awkward and everything, it just sort of didn't, and we ended up having a bunch of like really long and deep conversations about what exclusivity meant to us, and we both just sort of decided in the moment to walk off having exclusivity. And we gave ourselves a lot of off ramps, like, when we move together, when we move after graduation, we should stop this whole non-monogamy thing. When we get married, we should stop this whole thing. When we start having kids, we should stop doing this thing that we're doing. And it started making less and less sense the longer we went. Like, going back to monogamy made less and less sense the longer we were together.
Right.
So we just never did.
In a practical sense, what did it look like at the beginning? You said it was a threesome for your first experience, and then did you continue having? Was it mostly like casual encounters, or did you start seeking long-term or more serious partners?
It started with just being more casual encounters. There was a sort of starvation economy, scarcity of resources sort of mindset that at least I had, where I didn't think anybody would want to deal with me, being that I was somebody who was in a relationship already that I was already very committed to. So I would just sort of date whoever would have me. Yeah. And that was good enough for a while. Like, it was, like I dated a lot of friends, people that I knew who were friends who were in these sort of wishy-washy, are we, aren't we, unrelationships. Right. They were good to date me because it was like, well, I could get a better short-term deal from Kevin than I could get if I can't get a long-term deal from the guy that I'm with. I could get a better short-term deal with Kevin, and that was sort of me as like sort of like a makeshift semi-boyfriend for whoever I was dating.
Okay.
Did you like that?
That became unsatisfying.
Yeah, I was going to say
it was good. Yeah, it was good for a while, and like no hate to anybody who sort of put me in that sort of like temporary spot. It was good for me and it was good for them, but eventually it stopped being good for me, and I stopped dating people who didn't identify as non-monogamous. Like, if they weren't already identifying that way, if they didn't already have partners, like I'd steer away from those folks, and then I started really blooming in polyamory.
Right.
Yeah.
And so right out of the gate, you guys were dating or seeking out separate partners. It wasn't always you and her were finding a third or another couple or.
Yeah, no, we're both like at the time we were both far too straight for that. This was like, like this threesome, as far as going outside of heterosexuality, was a fluke. It was kind of a fluke for my then girlfriend, now wife. Uh, now the fluke. Now the fluke is heterosexuality for me, where like I'm straying further and further from that path, which I'm just fine with. But at the time, like that seemed like a good idea. But there was never a point where we started dating people together. There's maybe like there's a grand total of like 2 or 3 people that we've both said, hey, they're very attractive at the same time and meant it the same way,
Right.
So we dated separately from the start. And that was a little bit difficult because as a man, I'm fed so many narratives that other men are enemies, other men are rivals.
Right.
So when she started seeing other guys, I had to I had to sort of swallow like, what are my real feelings about this? What are my feelings about this? And what are the feelings that society tells me I'm supposed to have about this? And when those weren't the same feelings, I had to ask myself a lot of hard questions. Like, I thought I was going to flip a table. I thought I was going to be angry. And instead I was just like, well, I'm glad she had a good time. I'm glad she came home.
Yeah.
So if the anger I'm supposed to feel is fake, what else about society is fake? What else about the reactions that I'm expected to have as a man in America? How much of that is fake? And then, I had to chip away at a lot of expectations.
And those expectations, I imagine, continued as you moved in together, and you said you're now married, and fighting against those expectations of, especially when you get married, now it has to be a monogamous relationship, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's what we thought. Like, we thought, there's so many ways. Like, we thought we were just being immature and playing around, but instead we were making positive decisions for our lives. We were making informed decisions. Like, we both know what monogamy is. We both know what it looks like. And all of a sudden we were outside of monogamy and thinking, this suits us better than what we had before.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to definitely circle back to some of the things that were sort of stereotype breaking that you guys did, and also the sexuality aspect. But I guess just to kind of continue on, do you mind, so you guys graduated and you had talked about, well, we're going to quit, we're going to give this up cold turkey when we graduate. It seems like that probably didn't happen if you're writing books and blogs about it at this point.
I mean, it got to a point where basically it wasn't broken, so why are we trying to fix it?
Yeah.
And like, we started having other people in our lives that made sense to be in our lives. And it didn't make sense like, okay, well, now that we're married, we should throw these people in the garbage. Like, that didn't make any sense. I remember when my older daughter was born, I left I got one of my wife's friends, our same guest star from that first threesome, came to the hospital because she's a loved member of our family. She came to the hospital, and after we left, because we had to leave mother and child in the hospital, she and I left together, and we ended up going back to my place. And I'm like, we were supposed to stop this when we became parents for all of 12 hours, and nothing stops here.
Right. So you've continued on a relationship with that mutual friend?
Yeah, like it's more of a friend relationship. It's more of a friend relationship, but like the way basically all of my polyamory works is we're doing what works best for us.
Okay.
And that's me and whoever I'm with. So like, if it means that I'm somebody's support system, cool. If it means that I'm just somebody's bud, cool. If it means that we're hooking up and not really doing much of anything else, cool. So like, at least with this person, like, our relationship is, this is my friend, and sometimes we hook up and sometimes we don't, but we're good friends and we can trust each other in the clutch regardless.
Yeah. No, I think that's awesome that you guys are able to go into it with almost no limits or boundaries. And allow yourselves the freedom to explore the relationship without having all of that. Have you found that the lack of limits or boundaries has caused issues for you in the past? And have you had to back up and reinstate some?
It has caused trouble in the past. Basically, I don't carry a lot of structure to my polyamory. I don't, I'm closer to relationship anarchy, and what I realize is that's not going to work for everybody. Some people need that level of structure. Some people need to be able to say like, "Hey, how many people are you dating, Kev?" and need like an answer that takes less than 30 seconds to answer, and I'm not going to have that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to say, okay, well, I'm seeing these 3 people and this is what my relationship is with these 3 people. I have no idea how many people I'm seeing. And those relationships are fluid enough that like sometimes they're hot and heavy, sometimes they're lukewarm, and that's okay. I'm okay with either one. As long as the people that I care about me and like we're on the same page with what we're doing, I'm okay with that. Everything else that's up in the air, I'm fine with it being up in the air, but not everyone that I see is going to be just that fine with that level of sort of airy-fairy, looseness,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you guys were starting this, did you evolve into that loose structure very quickly, or was this another example of you first you broke the binds of the traditional monogamous relationship, and now you find yourself in the polyamory world, and you're now thinking, well, this is the way we're supposed to do polyamory, and then you sort of broke those binds as well, or?
Yeah, I mean, it was gradual. Where I remember like the first sort of game changer for my situation was like I started seeing somebody and she had. Like, I was one of like 5 boyfriends, one of whom she lived with, and she also had a girlfriend. And we went to a housewarming party, so it's like she's there with the guy that she lives with, who she's having this housewarming party with, the partner that she lives with, and two of her other boyfriends, myself included. And I showed up there with my wife, and this woman's nesting partner had another girlfriend who was there. And I remember thinking like, this is what I want my situation to look like. Like, I'm at this party and, my girlfriend has a bunch of her people here and her boyfriend has a bunch of her people here. And I've got a bunch of people here, because I showed up with my wife. And I'm like, this is what I want. This is what I want it to be like. And that's sort of where it's been ever since. Before it was sort of formless, like, again, sort of dating whoever would have me. And then it was like, all right, well, I'm going to date people who I can specifically do this with. Like, if I'm dating someone and I can't bring them around the other people that I'm with, then I'm not dating that person.
Yeah.
And so that worked out really well. And then eventually I got to a point where I was like, well, every time I'm meeting, I'll meet someone. I'll think this person is interesting. I want to explore where that goes, but I never stop feeling that way. I've yet to hit a point where, okay, well, I'm dating 5 people, and that's all I want to date. I'm still going to meet someone that seems interesting to me, and I'm still going to want to explore where that goes. And as long as we're on the same page in terms of like my availability and their availability and, what we're each looking for out of our relationship, I'm okay with that. If they're like, okay, but Kev, I need like a set standard day of the week every week, I'm not going to be able to offer that to anybody. So if that's what they're looking for, they can just find it with someone else. No harm, no foul. I'll still see you at the next Christmas party. Yeah. But if we're on the same page and we've got the same level of interest, then all brakes are off.
Yeah. I'm curious. It sounds like, you and your wife have I don't know if you call it your primary relationship, but it is, you have children together. So I'd imagine that it does take more time than some of your other relationships. And to expand on that a little bit, how have you navigated having children with multiple relationships?
I'm of a culture that always sort of has people around the house, and that's like sort of how I grew up, where my folks are both immigrants to this country. Okay. So there was always an aunt or an uncle who was staying with us who was like off the boat, trying to find trying to like get themselves set up in America. There was a point where just sort of as a measure of childcare, my parents brought my aunt in from Guyana, and she stayed with us for several years. So there was always sort of like a babysitting option going on there. I'm used to having more than two adults in a house, so my kids are used to having more than two adults in a house where we're really age appropriate with what's happening with our partners. But my kids are never surprised to see someone else. It's always like, hey, I've got a friend coming over. Like they want to meet people. They want to see who's here. They want to be nosy. Like, is this someone who can get me snack crackers? Is this somebody who's going to get me a bottle of water if I ask them? Is this someone who's going to come to the tea party? And my kids are always sort of concerned from at their level, and they can spot the familiarity. Like, they understand that like this friend is more than a friend, but like they also understand that like there are boundaries to how much they can ask and how much they really want to know.
Right. Yeah. And how much you're going to show in front of them, right? It's not. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's important too. That I think a lot of people that maybe aren't as familiar with this type of thing would think that that's not appropriate, but I think they just don't quite understand that you're capable of being in the room with your partners and not ripping each other's clothes off for So I think it's not as big of an issue as people like to think.
And like the hard and nasty and dirty reality that my kids are learning is that you can love multiple people.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is a wonderful thing to learn.
Yeah. And it's something that I had to like. I haven't really had to have a lot of like long conversations with my kids about non-monogamy because like they get it. They get it quicker. They get it quicker because they're young kids. They're not like so ingrained in societal standard that that this is some weird thing for them.
Right.
For them, it's just like, well, hey, you know how when your sister was born, I still loved you? Well, I love your mom and I love this other person. And some people feel that's strange. And they get it. They immediately get it and they're immediately adjusted to it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and maybe building on that, do you mind talking about some of the things you alluded to earlier in terms of societal norms that you as a male or even as a male who's also a person of color, the things that you've had to fight against and battle against over the past 10, 11 years, or I guess it would have been 2000, so 16 years since you guys sort of started exploring this?
Like the one thing that really irks me in terms of like just like being a man is this idea that I'm forming a harem. Like starting off being a man who was primarily attracted to women, like, and that's changed recently, but like, at the start it was I'm a man dating women, and people felt like that was me like collecting, and that's not really how I see it, and that's not how my partners see it. And also my partners have autonomy. They're free to date who they want to date. There was always this sort of very male driven expectation that if I'm dating two or three women, that those women were off limits to others, or that was how like I'm sort of structuring a relationship. And I'm not doing that. And I'm also not dating women who would allow that. So, it's basically societal expectation of what a guy would do if he had the ability to date multiple people. And that's not what I'm doing, and that's not how it's being done,
Yeah.
So that would be really difficult. What I made a lot of a career out of is running into racial expectations, and there was a lot of that. There was a lot of different expectations where if I'm black and polyamorous, there were expectations that I was doing a white thing, or that I was doing something that was sort of reserved for white folks, and that wasn't just black folks feeling that way. There were white folks who very clearly made it seem like I was in the wrong space at the wrong time. There was an expectation that my blackness was something to be fetishized. There was an expectation that my blackness was the only thing I had to offer a relationship, and I speak about that at length in Love's Not Colorblind, just sort of the forced ambassadorship of it, the fetishization, the othering that happens that keeps people of color out of these spaces. I spoke about when I started speaking about that, like I got a real following out of it, and then I wrote a book that people get a lot of value out of, and I'm really proud to have written a book that people get value out of. Right now, like in my local community, I've been managing a lot of people of color exclusive events and a Facebook group and everything for my local community, and it's such a refreshing space to be able to sort of enjoy polyamory, enjoy polyamorous communities without expectations on our race, and also to be able to have, how it is. If you're non-monogamous and you find yourself in a non-monogamous community, all of a sudden you're speaking with a language, you're speaking with a culture, and you don't have to define yourself to other people,
Yeah.
Where if you say a word like metamor or compersion, you don't have to pause and explain it to the person you're talking to because they already know,
Yeah.
They're metamor standing right next to you, listening in on your conversation with compersion,
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So to be able to experience polyamory with other Black folks, with other people of color, and not have to sort of code switch without having to, explain a culture, explain a language, explain sort of like a lived experience, it's really freeing. Last year around this time, I got together with maybe 20, 30 people in my home, and we watched that Spike Lee show, She's Gotta Have It.
Okay.
And we watched the entire first season on Netflix together. And there were things in there. There were cultural markers in there that had we been watching it with white folks, you would have had to stop and explain. And the ability to watch it without having to stop and explain was really valuable. There was I'm spoiling a little bit, but the show's like a year old, so sorry. In the 9th episode of season 1, there's a police encounter that, while watching it, I had a really harsh reaction to. I watched it and my hands started shaking. I started getting really anxious, and thankfully that encounter doesn't turn into anything violent, but my reaction was to violence. I had to get up and leave the room, go into the kitchen, have a drink, take some time to calm down before coming back out and finishing the show. And being around people who understood that reaction, being around people who had lived experience with sort of police encounters, that was really valuable. That was a really valuable moment in that space. And I've been trying to have those sort of moments ever since, or not that specific moment, just create a space that allows for those sort of moments.
Right. Sure.
And it's more comfortable, right? It's comforting, I would imagine, to be in those spaces.
Yeah. And so it's something that I try. It's something that I try to build on, and also our local community is bustling, and I take some credit for that. I was part of a turnaround about a year and a half ago of our local community, of our local polyamory community here in the Philadelphia area, but still, even if we held a big event and 50, 60, 70 people showed up, there'd still only be 5, 10, 15 people of color there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Whereas if I host an event that's exclusive to people of color, we'll get 30 people of color.
Right.
Yeah.
And
we've there's a local Lebanese restaurant that we've been taking over the last couple of months.
No, that's amazing. And I think one thing I wanted to maybe talk about, and so first of all, right, you're talking about exclusive events, and I've read at least the first half of your book, and you talk a little bit about why it's important to have those and why it's not really acceptable for me to say, well, we're having a white exclusive event, right? And the reason is that I'm not part of a racial minority, and therefore I don't really need that support from my community. And I totally agree and understand that. But I guess my question is, I mean, to me, the ultimate goal would be to not need an exclusive group one way or the other, and that the regular, the event would be 50-50. And I feel like that would be the ultimate goal. Or am I, and maybe the question is, what are some things that you feel would be ways to help us get closer to that, and not to get rid of the exclusive event, but to make other events more inclusive?
I don't know if there's ever a way to get to a goal. Like, I don't want to say that there is a goal, because I don't know that there's ever a way to get to that. And also because, like, if there is a goal, you have to constantly work to get it. Like, there's no way to, like, score a touchdown and then, like, the game is over and you won, there's a lot of oppression and privilege to unpack with all of these things. And, like, we're talking about non-monogamy, but it's really just society in general.
Yeah.
So, like, there's never going to be I don't know if there's ever going to be a point where, like, representation is just correct.
Yeah.
If it is, then all of a sudden, like, we don't need that. But, like, when does that ever happen? Like, right now, locally there's a what's it called, a play party. It's like a play party that's like kink and swing and orgies and such, that is exclusive to, like, femmes, non-binary people, women. And this event, like, it's basically exclusive to everyone but cis men. And I hear awesome stories about this thing every month. Like, every time this event happens, I hear all these great stories. I've got friends that go there. They feel that it's a loving and supporting and welcoming space. There's a lot of, like, sexy stories and supportive stories, the kind of tear-jerking stories from this thing, like, every time. And I think, wow, I wish I could go to that. But also I realize part of the reason why it's awesome is because I'm not allowed to go to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I would bring all of my maleness, all of my privilege, all of the things that, like, the people who do attend, all of the, like, they're able to sort of be safe in themselves in a space where they're not suffering from the male gaze, which I'm going to be bringing with me whether I want to or not. Sure. Men as a safety threat, and, like, we talk, we're in a society that talks a lot about, like, dangerous people of color and dangerous Muslims and dangerous transgender people, when, like, men, specifically white men with guns, are, like, our biggest threat statistically.
Right. Yeah.
And, like, there are several murdered trans women of color every year, and a lot of them are murdered by guys that look like me. So I'm bringing that threat with me whether I want to or not. And that event is awesome because I'm not there. And so I don't know if there's ever going to be a point where that event doesn't need to happen, or that the exclusiveness of that event doesn't need to happen, because what would first have to happen is we'd have to craft a world where I wasn't a threat,
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, and I think maybe the question maybe wasn't misunderstood. Maybe I phrased it wrong. Was not that we need to get rid of the exclusive event, but and to use your example, ways to make those people who have to have that exclusive event feel more welcome at the regular play parties, the non-exclusive. So, not to say that, hey, we don't want you to have your space, but I want to create a space where you can also come here and feel that safe, and ways to create that, whether it's for people of color or for, trans people and non
creating a more inclusive space in general.
Right.
There's a lot of questions you have to ask when you run an event, and I do touch on it in the book. I do in Love's Not Colorblind, but, like, a lot of people feel like it's as easy as saying, okay, we're having a happy hour for polyamorous people, show up, and then when 20, 30 people show up, it's like, yay, we had a successful event. There's a lot of questions you need to ask there. Like, what part of the town is that in? Is it in part of a town? Is it in in the part of town where people of color also frequent? Is it like, you know, how much does it cost to get in for this happy hour? How much are the drinks? Is it accessible by way of mass transit? Because if it's like, as a parent, if it's on a night where I'm going to need babysitting, that's going to affect whether or not I can go. If I'm part of a group that's traditionally marginalized by way of class and finance, you know, whether or not I can make it there on mass transit, whether or not I've got to have a car, whether or not I can afford the drinks or the cover charge to get into an event, these are all affect whether what the demographics are of the group. Something I'm becoming a lot more cognizant of is like sensitivities. I've got a friend where if there's going to be a lot of smoke in the air, she's not going to make it. If there's going to be a lot of perfume worn, she's not going to make it. You know, I went to a bowling night in our local polyamory community like a year or two ago, and I remember parking my car, walking up to the alley, and there was like a steep stairwell down to the front door, and I remember thinking, yeah, if there's only able-bodied people that are going to be able to make it to this thing.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, because this stairwell is challenging for my able-bodied ass. You know, somebody in a wheelchair, on crutches, with a limp, with a cane, they're just not going to be able to make it in here.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, even if they didn't want to bowl, even if they just want to come and enjoy some fellowship with some other polyamorous people, they're barred at the door. You know, I host a lot of things at my house, and I try to make it as accessible as I can, but it's something at my house, you know, where I tell people, if you've got kids, I'll set up some room for kids to watch stuff down in the basement while we're watching stuff upstairs. If you've got you know, if you're coming in on mass transit, the bus takes a little bit of finagling to get here, but I'll come out to meet you at the train station if you want to take a train in. I'll pick you up from there. I'll drop you off there if you need to. I try to make it as accessible as I can, but it's my house. Like, there's not only so much I can realistically do.
Yeah.
If you're hosting something in a city, that's something you need to pre-plan before you even pick a venue.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and I think that's all very important stuff. And this is something I think we mentioned and we talked a little bit about in email, that we'd love to do and dive into this deeper with you and a couple other people that were on the email chain, and maybe do like a roundtable discussion about ways that we can be more inclusive and be more inviting to all sorts of people, not just racially speaking, but across the board. And I think
when you say we, you mean the non-monogamy community?
The non-monogamy community, and honestly, just people in general.
Yeah, people. That's true.
So yeah,
and also something we need to be doing is like telling our own stories and allowing for the voices of marginalized people to shine through, spotlighting them when we can. Mm-hmm. Because when we're not telling our own stories, when people tell our polyamory stories, a lot of it ends up being monogamous people pointing the camera lens at us, trying to portray a freak show. And a lot of that ends up being like triads, like able-bodied, cisgender, traditionally attractive, well-to-do white folks in these closed triads. And that's not all of what we look like. Whereas if we're telling our own stories, we're going to get a more accurate story. And if we're pushing forward marginalized voices, you're going to get a more diverse and inclusive view. Where poly role models is the most inclusive showcase of polyamory available anywhere. Period. And I wasn't aiming for that when I started. It just became that because the bar is so incredibly low, you know?
Right.
And like there aren't a ton of shows that portray polyamory in a variety of ways or featuring a variety of people. There aren't a lot of books written and so on. You know, there's not a bunch of books written as far as fiction. Nonfiction, there's a lot of books. They're almost all written by white folks, almost all written by white women, and they're all like sort of textbooks. But like as far as representation, like in fiction, you're not going to really find a lot of non-monogamous relationships. Like N.K. Jemisin did a really good job in her Broken Earth series.
Okay.
But that's just one author, and granted, that's one phenomenal author who won a bunch of Hugo Awards for the same series.
Yeah.
But you're not gonna find a ton more than that right now, at least not in under any names that you'd recognize.
Right. You know, you had mentioned people that you wanted people to tell their story and get their word out, and we agree 100%, which is why we wanted to start this podcast and try to get as many people to tell their story as possible, because we feel that's important. Do you have any other suggestions? I know you have your Poly Role Models blog, for people to reach out to you or to tell their story, how they could do that if they didn't want to come on a podcast.
All right, so we all, like, if you got a smartphone, you got a way. I mean, like, if you got a smartphone, you've got YouTube, you've got WordPress, you've got Tumblr, you've got Instagram, you've got Facebook, you've got Twitter. We all have, like, this sort of worldwide range now that we walk around with in our pockets. And, like, hell, I'll broadcast for damn near anybody, you know? Like, I've got people who don't even like me who are like, hey, Kev, can you broadcast this new project I'm working on? Hell yeah, because your work's more important than my ego. You know, we have the range in a way that we never have before, and we keep trying to, like, go to these traditional routes. We keep trying to let, like, mainstream newspapers, mainstream media outlets control our stories. Like, we try to let them tell our stories, and they always tell it wrong. I point to, like, I was in the New York Times a couple of years ago, and the article in the New York Times, I mean, aside from being, like, really boring, it was really not a non-monogamy story. It was a story of cheating partners who were using non-monogamy to sort of, like, spice up their unsatisfying marriages.
Okay.
And then they also added, like, bits and pieces of non-monogamous couples in there to make it seem like they, like, did a lot of the research, when a lot of that research was just sort of left on the cutting room floor, or however you phrase the cutting room floor in terms of an article. That's where a lot of our stories were left. If we forego that and just tell our own stories through our own methods and share each other's work and broadcast each other's work, like, I do that all the time. Like, I never hesitate to shout out, like, Alicia Bunyan Sampson, who does Diary of a Polyamorous Black Girl, or Dirty Lola, who does Sex at a Go-Go, Rebecca Hiles, who does The Frisky Fairy, Afrosexology, Jaminica Eborn, who does Trauma Queen. Like, I'm always shouting people's work out, because right now there's someone who needs to listen to an episode of Trauma Queen. You know, somebody's going through their personal pain and they need to listen to an episode. Somebody wants to get into sex ed and they're a person of color and they don't know whether or not it's a field for them. There's an entire podcast called Sex Ed in Color by Cameron Glover, and they need to listen to that, you know? So, like, I'm always trying to broadcast for people, because for every one of us that has a story, there's 100 people who need to hear that story.
Right.
So we have the range. We just need to sort of cycle it up, you know? Like, there's someone in the next month or two, in the next week or so, that I'm going to say, like, hey, you know about that Normalizing Non-Monogamy podcast? And then you're going to have a listener that you didn't have just because, you know, somebody needed to hear that. Somebody's going to need to hear this podcast, and it's going to make sense to their life. Where I was fooling around in non-monogamy for damn near a decade before I found it as polyamory, and found a community and found a bunch of resources that could really help, you know?
Yeah.
Where I didn't know about, like, the Ethical Slut or Opening Up or any of those books until way later than I probably should have. Those are things I should have had, you know, in year 1, and I didn't have them till, like, year 7.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's awesome to hear that, you know, you're basically saying, start a blog, start a podcast, create some YouTube videos, and reach out to the community.
Or write a guest article too. It doesn't have to be a whole. Yeah, and whatever you want to do.
And that what I love hearing on your behalf is that you're not taking a scarcity mindset of this, that by promoting their work, you're somehow taking away readers of your blog and of your work, but rather you're creating a bigger, stronger community. And I think that's something that we love hearing, that just because you point someone to us doesn't mean that now they don't have time for you. And I think that's sort of a metaphor for polyamory in general, and I think that's
Exactly.
amazing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, there are projects that I felt were derivative of poly role models, but I still spotlighted them, because like my work stands on its own, and their work, was different, just different enough that I didn't feel like it was completely infringing on what I was doing. So as long as you're not doing poly role models, I will shout you out,
Yeah.
No, and I think that's fantastic. And now if we could circle back and hear a little more about your story, and not to downplay any of what we talked about, but I kind of wanted to get more about your story out there, and hear a little bit about what are some of the things that you found challenging personally as you were going through this, and maybe some of the ways you overcame those, and if you've been able to turn them into strengths by at this point.
I know I was worried about how out to be early on, like how much am I going to talk about this, in terms of like my folks or the people where I work, or like eventually when I had kids, how much am I going to want to like let out in terms of like their teachers and so on. And that was a worry, but then what I realized was it's also a worry for the people that I'm seeing, that I'm not backing them up. If I'm not being out and honest, like how can they feel safe and stable in a relationship if I won't acknowledge that it's a relationship?
Right.
And I also have to acknowledge that I had the privilege of being out. Like I work in a career that is like, I work in technology. I work as a technical writer. Nobody was gonna beef with me about what my relationships look like. I write, if I'm writing an instruction manual, it's not like I'm going to be in front of a CEO or a client. I'm writing a thing that someone is going to read to somebody else, or someone is going to read off in a cubicle somewhere. Nobody cared what I do with my personal life.
Yeah.
So when I was out, I realized I had the privilege of being out.
Yeah.
I wasn't beholden to my family for like financial support. Otherwise, that would be a concern.
Mm-hmm.
So because I wasn't, I was able to just say, you know what, I'm out. This is what I'm doing. And like I started dating someone who I refused to acknowledge as just a friend or something. So at one point, like my wife and I were going to a polyamory meetup in Philadelphia, and then we were going to a second polyamory meetup later that day in central New Jersey, because we had friends who were running both. And in between, we stopped for lunch, and we're just looking at each other like, why are we hiding this? What's the purpose now? So we just went on Facebook and said like, yo, this is who we are. This is what we're doing. We've been doing it for a lot of years, but also like this is what it's structured as now. And the reception from most of our friends was like, well, we already knew that. And the reaction from our families were a bunch of private messages like, well, if you're doing that, how can I be doing that? So next thing you know, I'm educating. That's that ambassadorship right there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's, and so that was sort of the journey with us, and it wasn't an issue. And again, like I had the privilege of being able to make that not an issue. So because we had the privilege, we were out, and now that helps somebody else, where like right now I'm aggressively out. And if that means that somebody can come over and ask me for advice that they really need, I got them, If somebody needs to see that polyamory isn't just white folks, they can use my face as an example. I was in Philadelphia Daily News around this time, around December 2017. My wife and I were front page news, and it was an article that also featured the organizers of our local Black and Poly community and the founders of our local global community. And we added to that community hundreds of new people, and most of those people were people of color. Like over the course of 2 months, we added like 300 or 400 people, and most of them were people of color. Most of them were black folks.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm like, we didn't even know y'all existed, and now you're all here. And a part of that is me and my wife having our faces on a newspaper saying we are black and we are polyamorous. This is where we hold up, and people just showed. So like there were people, like I said, for every story you got, there's 100 people that need to hear that story, and in this case, very literally.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Do you think that would have had that same impact if you guys were sort of you're out, but you're not showing your faces and you're not out in the community like that? Or do you feel that being out and being proud about it was the tipping point that helped?
I mean, yeah. Where like if we're using that same group as an example, the founders and some other folks, like some other people in their polyamory network, they did a magazine article some years ago, and the article was like, hey, we're in this Facebook group, but the Facebook group was a secret group. So if you didn't have a friend who was already in there, you couldn't be added to it.
Okay.
So when I joined that group, there was maybe 300 or 400 or 500 people. There was about 350 people there, and then eventually we made the group more accessible, and that 300, 400, 500 people ballooned to 1,000. And then when we were in but that was over the course of like an entire year. Whereas when we put up our faces on that newspaper, it went from like 1,000 to like 1,400 over the course of 2 months.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, like the visualization, the representation was there, like very clearly there.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing. I think that's a good lesson, and it's important to hear too for people who are, and again, as you mentioned, a lot of people don't have the privilege or the ability to come out because of work or kids or family or whatever it is. But if you have that privilege, then maybe it's time to exercise it, and that's something that that I'll be honest that we're seriously talking about. So So I think that we appreciate hearing that, and it's something we're gonna take to heart.
The online version of that Philadelphia Daily News article, it was like on Philly.com. The online version of that article, it got shared around so much. It went to so many different places that like this year I was touring around the book Love's Not Colorblind. Like I visited like 18 different cities. I had about 24, 25 different stops because some places like Atlanta and New York and a couple other places I ended up in multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
That article went around so much that I'd run into people who would say like, I'm in this marriage. I kind of wanted to talk about polyamory to my spouse. I wasn't sure how they'd take it, so I passed them your article, and I passed them that article, and it gave them enough resources that it gave them enough of a sort of a knowledge base that we were able to at least have a conversation about it, or at least have enough of a language to know the term polyamory and to know that it was available to people of color. And from that point, we started having this conversation. Like somebody in Albuquerque said that to me, and that was like really valuable. Like that was really valuable to hear, because a lot of times you feel like you're just speaking into the void. Like there are times where I don't run into monogamous folks for weeks at a time, outside of my job. So to run into people who are like brand new to their journey that you help find their way, that's amazing. It's really surreal. It's really surreal.
Yeah, and I think that's incredible to have that kind of feedback loop. Makes it worth it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It makes it all worth it.
Yeah.
So one thing that we try to ask about, if people are up for it, and based on reading some of the interviews on poly role models, it sounds like it's a theme that you like to pursue as well. But I think people who aren't necessarily familiar, when they're looking in from the outside, see that everybody in this space is probably got STIs and we're extremely unhealthy. We're not taking care of ourselves, and I think, maybe that's a little bit extreme, but how do you take care of yourself and your partners to make sure everybody's staying healthy
and how do you have that conversation?
Yeah.
To backtrack just a little bit, like the people who say that, like, oh wow, they've got all these, they must have all these STIs. Basically, what they're saying is, because they're like, I'm extrapolating my trifling sex to their trifling sex,
right.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I maybe was a little extreme on that, but I know it happens, and I've seen it online. I've seen it in feedback that we've got from people, and so it's not too far out in left field.
No.
Yeah, no, not at all. I know with me, like, I have safer sex conversations with new partners, and if there is any change in my sexual health, I have those conversations before I have new partners. Like, fortunately, I haven't had like any changes in my sexual health in a few years, so like I don't have to have new conversations with old partners.
Yeah.
But like it's not a difficult thing. Where I actually had to have that conversation today, where I got invited to play with an established partner and a new partner at the same time, and I explained really quickly, like, this is the last time I got tested. This is what I'm positive for. This is what's going on with like my with any treatments that I need. This is what's going on with what I'm into and what I'm not into. Like, this is what's happening with my sexual health. And it was a conversation that took less than 60 seconds. Mm-hmm. Grand total, because she had to have the conversation with me, it took less than 2 minutes for us to have this conversation. It didn't break the mood. It didn't change what we were there to do. It was a quick conversation. I feel like anyone that tells you that they're not having those conversations, maybe they shouldn't be having sex at all.
Yeah.
I feel like anybody who is saying that that's a conversation that'll break the mood, they're not doing a good enough job establishing that mood.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and there's ways to have that conversation that aren't that
mood killers.
Yeah, that aren't mood killers. And honestly,
yeah.
And I think if you're depending on who you're playing with, right? If you're having those conversations and that's all it takes for them to decide that, hey, the mood's over, then I think you dodged a bullet yourself, really. I mean,
yeah. Without a doubt.
So
I mean, it's not a hard conversation. I know it's something that Reed Mihalko talks about in his like readaboutsex.com, the safer sex elevator speech. Yeah. It's a very easy conversation to have, and also again, the bar being low, the bar is really low for cisgender men in terms of how we treat our partners. Like, I'm dating a lot of people, and a lot of that is I treat people like people. I treat women like people. I treat my partners like people. Like, I treat people respectfully, and that goes a lot further than it should go when it's really just basic human respect. Mm-hmm. And what I found is my willingness and upfrontness in having those safer sex conversations carries a lot of weight. Like, not to say that there's any real danger for me in not having those conversations, but me being forthright and saying, "Hey, before we do this, let's talk about this." Know?
Yeah, and I mean, you've got a family, you've got kids, and your number one concern is making sure that you're safe and alive and living a healthy life, so you can be around for them. And I think that echoes through when you probably get tested regularly. You're having these conversations. You're doing all these things that you're probably sexually safer than non-monogamous people or monogamous people, whatever they are. The people who aren't like us.
Because Joe Blow going to the bar and picking up a rando for a one night stand, they're not having these conversations. You know.
Yeah. I think we need to find a way to make them, though. I think it would be awesome if we could start to influence that.
Hookup culture.
The hookup culture, yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I've screwed that up. I've missed the conversation. I've had to go back and have the conversation after the fact. There are times where I've definitely made my mistakes, But also, the bar being low, me owning my mistakes carries a lot of weight.
Exactly.
Like something that should be basic human decency, me saying, hey, look, I screwed this up. Can we have a conversation about that? Can I apologize? Can we make this right? Basic human decency that people often miss.
Yeah.
No.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Is there anything else that, not to highlight all of your mistakes, but I think it's easy for some people who look in from the outside. I keep messing that up. Maybe I'll stop using that phrase. People looking into this say, well, he's written books. He's been doing this for years and years. He's flawless at this. And I know
that's fake.
Yeah, it is. And I know it's fake because we've been doing this for 12 years ourselves and we still make mistakes. I mean, do you mind sharing one or two of your biggest learning experiences, and maybe that's a way to say one of the mistakes you've made?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since I've posted an update for it, but like on my blog, I used to post cautionary teachable moments from non-monogamous relationships.
Okay.
And it's been a while since I've gotten, and this was like people's anonymous stories. It's been a while since I've posted one, but like one of them is not anonymous. One of them is straight up my name on it. And I screwed up. I was dating someone brand new and she wanted to go barrier free. And it's like, I sort of knew what the reception to that would be. I didn't think, like, the other partners that I was seeing seriously, I didn't think they'd have a problem with it. And so I jumped the gun. Instead of having the conversation with them and saying, like, hey, I'd like to go without barriers with this partner, I just went for it. And then I had the conversation with them afterwards. And then I got tested afterwards. And, like, I knew what the results of all this would be, but I was supposed to have those conversations to start, not after the fact. And I screwed that up immensely. And I was embarrassed by it. I was embarrassed that I had messed up. I didn't want to, like, just come forward and say, like, hey, this is me messing up here. So eventually it came out. Like, two of my partners, like, I was away at a conference with my wife, and my other two partners were at the house watching my kids and having conversations, and that was the conversation they had. And they reached out to my wife, and they were all very upset with me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, as well they had a right to be. Again, this is me screwing up, completely. So I had to sort of rebuild trust with all three of those partners in three different ways, all at the same time. And it was the most grueling relationship effort that I ever had to put into it. Eventually I got back on the same page with all three of those partners. I sort of rebuilt trust with all three of those partners. I'm still with two of the three. The one that I'm not with, that situation doesn't have anything to do with it. But the one thing that I thought was actually really valuable was that, like, those three women who I had burned completely, who had every right to set me on fire, they formed a friendship in those moments where they were just sort of loving on and supporting on one another, while dealing with my bullshit. And each one of them at some point was like done with me. Like, each point, like, they were just like, you know what, I'm done with this guy. Like, this was too much. This was too far. It was a small mistake that spiraled into a big mistake. He should have just been honest. Screw Kev, I'm out. And the other two would jump in like, hey, well, like, your relationship with him is valuable to us as well. Like, we care about your well-being, and, at least he's trying to make up for this. At least he's trying to rebuild trust and, like, being face up. Like, once it was exposed, like, once any of that dishonesty was exposed, I didn't try to spin it. I didn't try to make it anyone else's fault. I didn't try to, duck and cover. No, like, it was out and out. And, like, I claimed complete responsibility, as well I should. There was nothing else I could do. And each one of them sort of pulled each other back in to the fold, to the point where I was able to sort of, like, learn and grow and rebuild each of those relationships. And yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah.
It was a lot. Like, what I've learned what I've learned from that experience and what I've learned from every experience in terms of like posting those cautionary poly stories is integrity is key. Integrity is so key. Like every mistake I've ever made in polyamory is because my integrity wasn't on point. And every rebound I've ever had to make, focusing on that integrity was what made that rebound possible. Every story that I've posted as far as cautionary poly was a communication issue at its heart. And if communication was better and honesty and autonomy was better, that story doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what I would pass on to any and everybody.
Yeah, and I think that's very valuable. And
thank you for sharing that, because it's not easy to admit that we make mistakes, and
that everyone screws up sometimes.
And maybe
I fucking hate that story.
Well, we appreciate you being willing to share it. Maybe we could take the mistake train and put a fun spin on it. One of the questions we like to ask people is a blooper, maybe something from the blooper reel that's happened, whether it was to you or because of you, and it doesn't have to be quite as serious, but it's nice to hear that we don't all get into these situations and everything is perfect.
That we're all human.
I mean, it's not really a specific situation, but like my partners always have a lot of fun picking at me. Like whenever you get any two of them in a room together, any two or three, or any multiple number in there, that's what my life looks like, is them poking fun at me and sort of pushing me around a little bit. What I can reference is, like, if you've seen Black Panther and Civil War and Infinity War, what you'll notice is that, like, T'Challa when he's around the Avengers, T'Challa when he's in Civil War, when he's at the UN, T'Challa when he's gearing up for the fight in Wakanda and in Infinity War, he's a king, and people respect him as a king, and people see him and view him and treat him as a king. And then when you watch Black Panther and see him getting teased by his little sister, getting teased by his friends, getting teased by Okoye, like that's it's these two sides of this guy, and like people kind of give me a lot of people kind of view me a certain way because I've got a book and a blog and all that, when really I'm just the guy that goes home and gets teased by his wife and his partners and like the people around him. I'm just the guy that gets pushed around a bit.
Yeah.
So you're a victim.
I wouldn't go that far. Like I mean, there have been times where it's gotten to be a bit much, and that's the thing. But for the most part, like, it's just good, good-natured ribbing,
Yeah. You're a normal human being, I think is what you're trying to say.
Yeah. I'm always really weirded out when people treat me like an expert. Like, nah, I'm a guy who screws up like everybody. Right. When people treat me like, I've written a book, but like that doesn't give me any level of expertise. Like, I'm talking about my lived experiences in this book,
Yeah. No, and I think that's important, and we appreciate you sharing that. And maybe before we let you go, if there's anything else you wanted to get out there and share that we haven't asked about or we haven't touched on yet, we'll give you the opportunity to do so.
The other book, the October book, For Hire Operator.
Uh-huh.
I'm really excited about that, and we're also working on a follow-up. But like, while I was writing Love's Not Colorblind, I needed it was a hard book to write because, again, it's from my personal experiences. So there's a lot of really harsh stories in there and a lot of really harsh experiences that I had to sort of pour into that. But like, I needed sort of a mental break, and I wrote a superhero story. I wrote this superhero story, and I didn't expect anyone to ever read it. And I passed it on to my friend Alana Phelan, and she's a librarian. She does book reviews. She reads hundreds of books a year, and she wasn't into it. Like, she wasn't into it at all. But then, like, once Love's Not Colorblind came out, we went back to it. Like, she told me basically I needed to rewrite it, that it didn't have authentic voices in terms of certain identities. particularly identities of women characters.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a point where, like, she'd point out something and I'd rewrite it. And she'd point out something and I'd rewrite it. And she'd point out something and I'd say, why don't you write it, though? Like, you've got an idea in your head of how this would be awesome. So you should write this awesome thing. And that became us taking a book that I thought no one would ever read and turning it into a book that I think is, like, actually pretty awesome now. And that's for hire operator. And it's called that because, like, for hire is the universe, and we're going to try to create more books in a for hire universe. Like, we're working on a second one called For Hire Audition, and I'm not sure when that's going to release, but I'm pretty excited about that as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And hopefully people will go out there and read Love Is Not Colorblind and also your new one, For Hire Operator.
Are they both on Amazon, or what's the best way to get them?
Operator is available on Amazon. It's available on Smashwords. You can find it on, like, Barnes and Nobles, iTunes, Apple Books. It's available as a paperback from Amazon exclusively because that's who we're publishing through.
Okay.
It's self-published through Amazon, so that's where the paperbacks are. But the ebooks are available basically everywhere. And Love's Not Colorblind is available in the same way. I think the paperbacks, though, are available in stores as well. For Love's Not Colorblind, like, we went through Thorn Tree Press, who did More Than Two, and a lot of Dr. Elizabeth Sheff's books.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Polyamory, coming out about your non-monogamous relationships. So like Thorn Tree put out Love's Not Colorblind. We self-published For Hire, and so they're available sort of in two different sort of ways.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
We'll make sure to get links up for all of them.
And if anyone wants to check out your blog, I'm assuming you can just Google Poly Role Models and find it pretty easily.
Yeah, and I'm Poly Role Models everywhere. I'm Poly Role Models on Twitter and Instagram. The blog is on Tumblr, but it also mirrors to Facebook. Poly Role Models on Facebook. So yeah, that's all very, very easily available.
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, again, we'll put links for everything, and any way possible people to get a hold of you, will make it easy. And again, thank you for taking the time to chat with us, and we hope maybe we get you back when For Hire audition comes out, and we can do it again.
Yeah. I definitely want to talk about it. Like, I'm a geek boy who's into superheroes, so, like, the ability to put out some representation as far as a superhero novel, I want to keep doing that. Like, if I had to do nothing else, I would just do that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's fantastic. And thanks again so much for your time. We had a great time talking to you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me on. Have a good night.
Absolutely. You too.
We're back.
We are back.
Thanks to Kevin for taking the time to talk with us. I know he's a really busy person, and we appreciate him carving out some time for us.
Yeah, it was awesome, and we've talked with him about doing some follow-up stuff with a couple other people from the community that he is very well embedded in. He knows a lot of awesome people, and we were actually put in touch with him by Crystal from a previous interview. So again, we're talking about doing maybe like a panel discussion with them, like as a special release episode. So let us know what you think about that idea, because we're working on putting that together, and we're excited for it.
Yeah, we are.
What else you got, Emma?
Next week, we have an interview with Vel and Jason.
Yeah, two awesome listeners who reached out to us and have a really cool story. It's amazing interview.
Yes.
And they all are. We say that every week. We should come up with a new adjective.
I know. And the other thing we wanted to quickly mention is the resource Casty. You can get a free 6-month trial by using the link on our website, and it's a dating website. We use it to meet all the sexy people.
Yeah, really, 6 months free. What do you got to lose? You got nothing.
Yeah.
So go check it out. Give it a try. Use the links and make your profile. Make it hot.
Yep.
Or hot.
Okay.
Stop talking.
We're not doing that.
We're not doing that? All right. We'll see everybody. We'll see.
Wait.
Okay, we can't wait.
Website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com. Twitter, Instagram, and Cassie, NNM Podcast. Check us out. Reach out.
See you in a week.
Bye.